So how did you get the concept of the astronauts?
When I was first talking to publishers about writing a book, I had written the book that you talked about on venture capital that released in 2002 in a completely different world. Especially the publishing world was very different. These same men who were kind of encouraging me to ask God, identity questions, were also encouraging me to go back into writing. And so that's I did. That's what my heart wanted to do, and they saw it more clearly than I saw it. But when I started first talking to publishers about books and about men and about men's ministry, they said, "Oh man, men are really tough to write to. Most Christian books are written by men, but they're read by women. And so you need to write to both men and women." And I felt like God had given me a message. It was for men. And so I felt like it would be disingenuous to market something to women when I didn't feel like this particular, I know my wife and I have done a bunch of things that are both targeted towards men and women, but this particular message around these 3 books, I felt like were sort of targeted to men. And so the publisher said, well, here are the difficulties. Men are tough to reach from a marketing perspective, Christian men. They don't read a ton of books, 2. And then 3, when they do read books, their wife gives them one, a friend gives them one, they pick it up, from a recommendation or something like that. They don't tend to finish them. And so I thought, well, I don't know. I wasn't looking at the data. I was just taking this on faith from some publishers. And I said, I don't know if any of that's true, but I at least want to create something that counters what is true in those 3 statements. In the Wire devotional, this email devotional that we send out twice a week, we've done a pretty good job of reaching men. And so I don't know if that first one's so true, but to the extent that Christian men don't read a ton of Christian books and don't tend to finish them, I think there is some truth in that. And so I wanted to create something that they hadn't seen before. I wanted to create something that was a lot of fun to read and created momentum and pulled you into the next chapter, when you finished one, and it was just fun. And so the first book in the series is called Invention, and it's all about identity. Surprise, surprise, it's my story, but it's also the stories of these 7, industrial revolution era inventors, guys like, Thomas Edison and Guillermo Marconi and Alexander Graham Bell. And they provide, one, it's just interesting. I think it's just interesting stuff to read. And that's certainly been the feedback from guys who have read those books or read that book. But they also just provide a great kind of analogy and stories around, God-given identity. And so this next book, this one I just released called Odyssey, is all about taking a journey, figuratively or literally, to meet God. So that, because modern Christian men these days take so much on second and third hand by sitting in a sermon and hearing somebody else tell their story, somebody else talk about God. But men are just wired to go see things for themselves. That's when something has a ton of credibility. When we experience it for ourselves, that's when our hearts are changed. And so this book is an encouragement to men, again, figuratively or literally, like you did, literally just jumping in the car, hitting the road, heading off into the desert like Jesus did, and meeting God somehow. It'll look different for everybody, but somehow in the silence and the solitude and the in the walking and the driving, we encounter God and we establish a relationship that's face to face. So that's the greatest adventure any of us can ever take. No question. Any human being, to meet God. So I wanted, if I was going to try to make this fun and add some cool stories in there, I wanted to use something that was at least close to that. And I figured the greatest physical journey, man has ever taken, which is, first into Earth orbit and then all the way to the moon. I figured that would be a good one. And I also knew there were going to be a bunch of these guys who were men of faith. All 6 astronauts in this book come from the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo era, kind of this golden age of space exploration in the mid-century, mid-20th century. But they were also, I chose all 6 men who were men of faith. And they, again, provide great stories and great analogies. And they're inspiring, but they're also guys just like us. So it just fit, it's just a lot of fun.